Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Hello, my name is Jermaine McDougall, and I'm coming to you today live from Bogota, Colombia. That's right, in South America, a bit far on the other side of the world, but it's all good. For starters, I would love to thank the event organizers for allowing me to be here and participate, as well as interact with each and every one of you. Hope all is well on your end, but like I said again, we're going to spend the next, 20, 30 minutes. I'm going to be sharing you some ideas about creating a path for what we call CLIL teacher identity in that particular instance. Just to get started, some introductions. This presentation, for the most part, is going to highlight, I should say, some possible what we call taxonomies that I have already put together, as well as related to skills and competences for that desired effective CLIL teaching in that particular instance. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today in this particular presentation corresponds to what is NEST, and a look at competences, as well as we're going to look briefly at identities, and I'm going to give you some ideas about some of the frameworks that I have already looked at and possibilities of a new framework that I'm trying to put together and related to bi or multilingual competences for that particular instance. Okay. In addition to that, what can I say? Well, why am I motivated about this particular presentation, or why am I motivated about these particular topics? Well, there are lots of things that are going on nowadays, and some of the things that are going on, as you can see here within Colombia, Latin America, in the South American region, is that it is still a big deal related to what we call NEST teachers and non-NEST teachers. Okay, there is not enough information that I found, or even that exists so far, related to what students and teachers believe about these particular concepts. Okay, and in addition to that, there's still lots of what we call misconceptions around the idea of what is native like in that particular instance. Unfortunately, there's still lots of discourses that are constructed around, I should say, recruitment policies. Okay, and the focus is particular on the native speaker. So the idea is that this particular study that I'm going to be sharing with you today corresponds to unrevealing some of those myths that exist related to what we call native speaking teachers, as related to CLIL, content and language integrated, I should say, competences for that ideal practitioner inside the classroom. Okay. What can I tell you? Give you some ideas about three different groups of teachers so that we can have a better understanding about what I'm talking about. For some, I'm looking at what we call relabeling teachers. Relabeling teachers because for years now we have had names. We've had labels put to us in terms of language professionals, language teaching, etc. And over the last 30 years, these names have somehow, I should say, changed briefly, or they've been adjusted, but either way, they still exist nowadays. So as you can see, going back, native English speaking teachers, we can date them back more than 30 years ago. Although there's lots of debate, academic debate and discussion related to these types of activities, it is still around. Okay, what can I say? NEST, fairly well-established term for the most part, but we also talk about ideas like expatriate teachers, overseas teachers, or some people recently say native English teachers in that particular instance. But my question is, how can we define that native English teacher? Okay, traditionally, these native English teachers per se, they come from the inner circle. Okay, nations like the US, Canada, the UK, Australia in that particular instance. But we also have what we say two types of teachers. And these group two teachers, once again, these are teachers who are often what we call fluent in the language of their students, all right, and perhaps sharing it also as a first language. So once again, we still have those things that we got to talk about. We also looking at teachers from what we call the inner circles as well. And so we have the inner circle teachers, such as countries like Nigeria, India, and the West Indies. But also we have what we call languages, where we have nations that still have English as what we call an official language, okay, for both the children, they're schooled in, businesses, etc. And once again, becoming much more bilingual and more often multilingual in the entire process. So to give you some ideas about the three different influences that we have, or not really influences, but the three different groups of teachers that we could actually consider or even think about when we are talking about native English speaking teachers. But the idea that the story does not stop there, okay? The story does not stop there. Why? Because, well, there's so many other things we've got going on. And we also need to consider the following. Do all of these teachers, for example, yeah, do they have the skills in order to successfully, what we call, as you say, coordinate content, yeah, and language successfully? Can they do both of these at the same time? Is it okay for them? Do they have the skills? Do my language professionals actually teach math? Do they have the skills to teach math? And what about my math teachers that are actually teaching in English as a medium of instruction? Do they also have all the skills needed in terms of second language acquisition or even first language acquisition? Do they have any clue about those types of things? So that's what we're going to be looking at, and this is once again the motivation study. Here, since I am representing or thinking about the research that's been done here in Latin America, okay, I'm going to be reporting on what takes place in Latin America. Does not mean that what I am sharing, what I'm talking about today, is not taking place in your teaching context as per se. I would love to see maybe in the future we can connect, organize, and see what are the thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions related to, I should say, that native English speaking teacher in your region. Okay, because I am sure there are some other difficulties, challenges, and there's some really interesting debates that are going on. But this is the challenge that I have here, and this is the debate that I would like to bring to the table. For starters, we talk about what? Defining, I should say, native-like competence. It's very difficult still for people to be able to define what is a native English speaker, or I should say, what is native-like competence. Okay, native-like competence is one thing. All right, so once again, trying to define that concept in a previous study has not been, I should say, easy to come by. I would also say that educational systems, all right, not understanding what language is or how language works. Language is a very interesting phenomenon, and it's a very interesting how we as language professionals, we once again we're well versed, linguists we're well versed in terms of how the language is used at work, but the educational system they seem to not. Why? Because language is still an isolated item. Language is still treated and looked upon as it is something different. It's like it's weird. It's all by itself in a corner. Okay. I can also say that still we don't have clear frameworks on what we call competences for CLIL or content and language combination inside the classrooms. These are still things that we're working on. These are things that we have to somehow figure out what can we do. Because since CLIL is very much so context oriented, meaning that what? We should be able to have, I should say, competences that cater to the region here. Okay, the same like would be, for example, in Korea, or the same could be, for example, maybe in Kuwait. The same should also be able to take place in Canada, the US, and even then, so we would have, I should say, much more specific, I should say, context and challenges inside our classrooms. Okay. What else can we talk about? I'm talking about some of the other regions, talking about lack of understanding and skills. Okay, in terms of the competences, skills needed for that bi or multilingual teacher. What I have found so far is that there are lots of, I should say, requirements, their skills, or even possibly some competences out there, but they're all isolated. There's no one, I should say, there was no one framework or structure that I found that I came across related to, I should say, the dimensions that correspond to both bilingual as well as multilingual teachers. Okay. And in addition to that, once again, belief, which is also still sad, that native-like competences are needed in order to be successful inside the classroom as well as for language learners. Something that once again we have to consider, something that we have to keep in mind, but the idea is that these are things that are still existing nowadays, which is why all of this becomes a problem within Latin and within the Latin American region in that particular instance, okay? And last but not least, we also talk about the stakeholders. Okay, the stakeholders in terms of what native English speaker is needed, all right, or required in order for success to take place inside the classroom. This is by far the largest myth, the largest, I should say, unfortunate debate that's going on because many language institutions, universities, schools, they still have this mindset, and this mindset is what has caused the language profession education as a whole to once again continue to be divided in that particular instance. So these are some of the things as to why I am motivated, still I am motivated as to sharing these ideas. What can we talk about? What did I do in terms of method? There were quite a few things were done just to give you some background information before I actually jump into the rest of our presentation for today. But we talked about what? I checked with students and teachers in terms of what they believed about NEST and non-NEST. Okay. We also talked about the beliefs surrounding the concept of native speaker models. Okay, I also once again tried to define core competences and skills needed for what we call qualified teachers. Difference here is not bilingual, Not multilingual, not native, but I'm looking for qualified teachers, qualified practitioners inside the classroom. That's what I was trying to define. In addition to that, I checked with over 200 plus teachers who had already received CLIL training, okay, and that are teaching in CLIL-like or CLIL-oriented environments, okay. Very important that we talk about here because I am looking for targeting individuals or participants that actually know about what's going on, that are immersed in, I should say, bilingual or multilingual environments here in Latin America, but at the same token, they have also received training per se. So it's just not one or the other, but we're focusing on those areas so we have a better target. Well, as you know, this is a mixed method approach in that particular instance, using descriptive research to measure the qualities of the teacher as well as the teacher competences. Population, once again, university EFL students mainly, CLIL trainees, bilingual education stakeholders. For now, we only looked at the university students, okay? As time progresses, we will be focusing on, I should say, the other grade levels as well, educational levels, so that we have a better understanding about what's taking place, okay? And at the same time, we also talked about teachers in both undergraduate as well as graduate programs, and English language professionals and bilingual teachers per se. So as you can see, we had quite interesting mix in that particular instance, in order to get some things done. Well, as you can see, there's some of the things we're doing, we have been doing so far, in order to actually get the data that's already been collected and have a better understanding about what's going on in that particular instance. What else can we say? As you can see, just to kind of elaborate a bit more, we talked about undergraduate level students for pre-service teachers. We looked at undergraduate level, I mean graduate level. Sorry about that. Students in the graduate level students and the in-service teachers from Universidad Sabana. We actually have 2 master's degrees in English language teaching, one for autonomous learning environments, the other one for what we call self-directed learning. One is 100% face-to-face, traditional on-campus blended learning mix, and the other one is delivered 100% online. We also talked about in-service language teachers as well. In-service language teachers as well, from other institutions and other universities, both public and private, in order to get a better understanding about their thoughts and feelings. So far, like I said again, we talked about more than 200 teachers, more than 100 teachers, I should say, in the sense that more than 100 teachers in teaching CLIL-like or multi-bilingual-like environments. And we also have quite a few what we call, I should say, stakeholders related to bilingual school administrators, coordinators, directors, principals, and even psychologists, which is quite interesting because they also play a large role in the selection process of teachers coming on board. And it's really good to know what they think or feel related to what we're doing. Okay, give you some ideas about some things that I've done so far. Give you some ideas as to where the data came from and how we're going to look at it today. Analyze and explored more than 20 plus, I should say, frameworks related to combining content and language today. Many of those frameworks can be found in what we call Europe, Canada, and the US. And none of the frameworks thus far have been, I should say, related to what we call Latin American contexts or regions or even environments. Some Latin American institutions I have found that they have partially adopted, I should say, some of these foreign frameworks. When you adopt some of these frameworks, well, it's a start, but it's not the end all. The idea is that we should continuously look for frameworks and models that correspond to unique, I should say, teaching environments and things of that nature in order to have better success, which is the idea. Very few frameworks consider, I should say, multilingualism or competences for teachers. And far too many, once again, trying to come up with ideal competences that are, I should say, far away from the actual realities of the classrooms and the teaching context and things of that nature. All right. Now, since we're talking both about competences and skills, I thought it would be interesting for you, just as a reminder, to get some differences to understand what is knowledge, and how does knowledge, skills, and abilities. Okay, so how does knowledge, I should say, skills, all right, and abilities, they actually make up what we call a competence. Okay. They make up what we call the competence here. And in addition to that, we are once again familiarized with what skill is. As you can see, the skills they form part of what we call this particular competence. Lots of times you will see both of these concepts either separate, together, or even mixed, because lots of times there's a fine line between one and the other, but the goal is that we are clear as to A competence corresponds to knowledge, skills, and abilities, and a skill is only just one of those things that we have there in that particular instance. Okay. This is what I came across in terms of the overall competences that were discovered as a result. Lots of good information. Some of the information is repeated. Some of it is repeated but uses a different name. The title is the same, but I found lots of things that the descriptors were, once again, very similar in nature. So I did my best to kind of group most of the like items together so that we can actually have a better conversation as to what exists nowadays, because it's before I can move on and try to fix the wheel, trying to, I should say, establish, create a gap there, try to fill that gap that we have, because there is a gap in terms of having competences competences and skills that are desired for, I should say, CLIL practitioners inside the classroom. And once again, CLIL is context oriented, so every context is a bit different. My South American, Latin American context in terms of challenges may be different. I'm sure it is from the Asian context in that particular manner. So these are things that we need to think about. Talked about what? Teaching in general. So there's the teacher, okay, as the individual. Core competences for teaching, okay, this is the teaching and learning process. And then there's some other that talked about professional competences as well for teaching as a whole, all right? And then we have 21st century competences and 21st century skills and competences. As you can see, once again, there's a lot of information on these two. I decided to separate them so that you can see that there are some slight differences about what we're looking for as the individual and what the individual should possess in terms of characteristics and things of that nature. They are a bit different, I found. And we'll talk about bilingual instructional competences. Bilingual instructional competences. There you go. Now, this is coming closer to what we want or what I'm looking for, but once again, it's not complete. And then we talk about language teacher competences, and we look at content teacher competences. Different. The idea, once again, is just to share some ideas about what I found and my proposal as to where we could head in that particular direction. So for starters, I'm going to talk about some of the competencies that make up a teacher. Competencies for that teacher. As you can see, based on literature and lots of other studies in the field, 4 key competencies have been identified. Yeah? These competencies, they correspond to trying to make the teaching learning process much more innovative, helping the teacher to become much more innovative and proactive and creative inside the classroom. Okay, so I talk about things like learning competences, educational competences, talk about social competences, and definitely we need technological competences. So these are just some ideas in terms of the core competences that I should say the average teacher needs to have when they decide to become a teacher. When you have received that vocation, when you are ready to start that journey, these are some of the basic things that, once again, scholars, the literature has proven time and time again that are needed. Once again, doesn't correspond to bilingual, doesn't correspond to content and language, and as you can see, definitely there are nothing related to multicultural anything here. Okay, another one. This is related to what? Teaching per se. Teaching, the process, the teaching process. Okay. Now the other one, the previous slide was what? Corresponding to the teacher. This is what we're talking about in terms of teaching. What do I need, and what tools do I need to make this successful? So here, this is interesting because we talk about pedagogical, I should say skills, tools, and competences, personal, social, as well as professional. This is used to do what? To improve, I should say, our students' performance. Used to improve the students' performance. Now, in addition to that, think about what? Think about your educational toolkit, okay? Your little toolbox. And I come into the classroom with my toolbox. And as a result of my toolbox, I have a job at hand, And my job is to deliver X or J or Y to my particular students. What am I going to do? I'm going to look inside my toolbox, okay? And I'm going to try to determine what is the best tool strategy that I need in order to be successful in the classroom. That's what I'm talking about here in terms of the pedagogy. Trying to improve my students' performance, okay? Now, in that particular instance, I'm going to look at each one of these, and we're going to take a few minutes, and I'm going to briefly talk about pedagogy, personal, social, and professional, so we have a better understanding about what teaching competences are involved in that particular instance. For example, pedagogical competences, principles, techniques, and strategies that the teacher chooses. I choose. This is my toolbox. I figure out what I want to get done. Okay. What do I need? Communicative competences, social cultural competences. There you go. Action research competences. Very good. Being observant, looking at data, being able to make informed decisions. All right. And competence related to information management, big data. What am I doing? What can I do with the information that I have? Very important. So once again, pedagogical competences are needed to help out with the teaching process. What else I got? Personal competences. Look at this one. Well, personal traits, attitudes and beliefs of the teacher. Three large areas: knowledge of myself, self-esteem. Yeah, you would be surprised at how many language professionals, colleagues, that still have issues with self-esteem, and control beliefs, which is another key area that we need to once again focus on and figure out what's going on. Social competences, which is my third area related to teaching, all right, refers to what? How to manage social and emotional development inside the class. There you go. Interesting. Because when I talk about that affective filter has a lot to do with social and emotional issues inside the classroom. Self-management, relationship management, social awareness, as well as responsible decision making. Now, when I look at these four elements, what am I thinking about? Well, this is what I'm hoping that my students should be able to do in the classroom. But guess what? This is designed for the teacher. Is the teacher self-regulated? Is the teacher able to self-manage themselves? Okay. Relationship management. This is very important. Social awareness. These are social competences, once again, that often we do not have as professionals, okay, inside the classroom, regardless of the class we are teaching. And this is a very important area you're going to see in a few minutes as to what others believe in this particular arena here. And the last one corresponds to what? Professional competences. Yeah. This is what I am doing as a teacher to maximize my ability to improve my students' learning outcomes. This is what I do. Okay. Challenges and obligations. How prepared am I? Jermaine McDougall. Okay. Subject knowledge. Do I know anything about English, math, science, social studies? Okay. What do I know? The knowledge of my learners. Do I know what my learners need? Not what they want, but what do they need? And not what I want them to have. What do they need? Teaching methodologies and approaches. Am I up to par on what's going on related to the latest trends? Okay, in teaching math, in teaching science, in teaching English per se. Okay, current curriculum knowledge. What do I know about my institutional curriculum? How is that compared to international trends in curriculums and things of that nature? Okay, and knowledge of the environment. Very important. What do I know about my institution? What do I know about the classes that I'm going to be teaching? I just arrived to the country. I just arrived to the city. What do I know about my environment? So these are things that, once again, am I prepared for these challenges and obligations when I am teaching? Okay. So as you can see here, these four areas here, very important. But I have another question. Which one of these competencies do you think the learners prefer most? What do you think they like the best? Huh? Any ideas? Do I have a show of hands over here? Anybody? Yeah? Well, I'm going to give you some ideas. All right. So personal competence, professional, social, and in that particular instance, pedagogical. Interesting. Personal, as you can see, personal competences was what the learners, thus far, they found to be the most popular. Can you imagine? Personal. And followed by professional, after that, social, and last but not least, pedagogical competences. Interesting, the study. Interesting what I'm finding. Why? Because see lots of information out there, and what I'm seeing is that our students, learners, they are a bit more. They're human. They're I should say human oriented, but they're also affected nowadays by that human element. Okay, who am I as an individual? And who I am is also going to represent and reflect what I do inside my classrooms. Definitely. And lots of times we fail to mention that, or we fail to even realize that these types of things actually cross over inside the classroom. So knowledge of myself, self-esteem, and control beliefs are what most of my students or the people that have been, I say, tasked thus far as being the most important element. Now, these are students. What about if I talk about my colleagues? My colleagues, obviously, they would say something totally different. I need to have what? Information related to what? I need to have information related to something totally different, okay, in that particular instance. So give you some ideas in that particular instance. So interesting the information that we've got so far, interesting the data that has been collected thus far, and now, I'm going to move on to a few other areas, okay? So characteristics of that 21st century teacher: facilitate, inspire, be creative, Okay, that's what we're looking for. Maximize what? The potential in their formal as well as informal learning experiences. I like this one here because we talk about learning experiences. Yeah, not what I am only giving them in the classroom, but what I can do for them, what they're doing for themselves, which is far more important as well. Our students, they bring lots of experience to the classroom. How man or women enough am I, professional and mature enough to actually include that inside my classes? Am I ready to do that? Can I do it? Because you will find that lots of teachers are actually, blocking out that own personal experiences that our students bring to the classroom, and as a result, limiting, I should say, the potential benefits and successes that we could have in that particular arena. All right, and here I told you at the beginning that they are similar nature, 21st century competences, and so we're a bit similar, and also the teaching skills. So we talk about things like knowledge of civil literacy, global awareness, cross-cultural skills. Okay, we also should consider things like critical and inventive thinking. Okay, and communication, collaboration, and information skills. These are all key areas that, once again, we should be thinking about. And in terms of our teaching skills, I think I find this area quite interesting because, once again, we are pushing these types of things on our students. We're pushing our students to move in this direction. But guess what? I am still finding out that teachers, in terms of competences, they lack critical thinking, lack problem solving, reasoning, and we're talking about synthesizing information. I'm still finding it in my colleagues that have been around for a very long time, they're still having difficulties trying to evaluate information, summarize information, or even paraphrase for that matter. So if I'm talking about synthesizing, can you imagine? Way up there on the thinking food chain, we still have lots to get done. So these are things that we need to consider. These are things that are really interesting for us. But once again, I have yet to find a framework that incorporates all of these different elements. It would be great to have them all, but once again, we need to see what's the best route to take so that we can incorporate these things when we are trying to find the ideal practitioner inside the classroom. Okay. We also talk about what? Research skills. We talked about creativity, curiosity, imagination, just once again, that creative thinking. And we talked about, once again, self-direction, that self-stuff. So as you can see, lots of things have, in terms of the 21st century teaching skills, I've already discussed it a few minutes ago in terms of the competences that are needed for that teacher. So as you can see, some of these things, they kind of cross over, and so that's a good thing. All right, that's a good thing. So we don't have a shopping list of, dozens or even hundreds of items that we would love to see in the classroom. That's not that's not the idea. So what's next? What's next? Okay, based on what I've seen, based on what I have just showed you, what's next? Because we're trying to get some ideas about what that bilingual or multilingual practitioner. All right. Now I'm using the word teacher, but I know we use words like instructor. There's a professor. There's and so there are many other words, or I should say, that can describe or label what we do in the classroom. But for practical purposes, I'm going to focus only on the word teacher, using also practitioners, etc., etc. All right. So what do we need? That bilingual individual or multilingual individual in the classroom. What do we need? Language proficiency. I can just not, pretend that, language proficiency is not going to be there. Attitude, attitude will go a long way. And as you can see, we talked about a few minutes ago, the students are looking for related to, things that are related to personal competences. Personal competences also relate directly to attitude. What am I able to do? What can I do? But what do I want to do? And am I willing to do? Okay. Content knowledge, as well as a good one. Linguistic knowledge, cultural knowledge, and last but not least, we talk about teaching knowledge. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 key areas, okay, that we could consider, think about, or even, once again, incorporate in our classes. Thinking about the ideal bi or multilingual professional teacher practitioner inside the classroom. Okay, this is something that I came across, and I wanted to share it with you because I said before, I have looked at many different tables, many different frameworks. This is one that came across in terms of what we call towards a common European framework of reference for language teachers. Everything here is great. I love it. But guess what? We're only focusing on what? The language teacher. The goal here is not just only the language teacher. What about my math teacher, my science teacher, my social studies teacher? What about the marketing teacher, my psychology teacher? What about my medical teachers, my doctors? What are we doing? The lawyers. The goal here is to establish a framework that can be used across the board, okay, across the board in that particular instance, that I can use it regardless of the subject that I am teaching, but I need certain skills, okay, skill sets, not the ones that I only bring, but the ones that I also need to acquire. And as a teacher training manual or as a teacher trainer per se, I can figure out what gap my teachers have, what gap, you know, they're going here, they're going here, they're going here, so that I can actually help them to get where they need to be. There's no one individual who's going to come straight from their undergraduate program, the university, and start classes tomorrow, and they have all of this. No, but if we build, we start from the bottom. Pre-service teachers, okay, we instill these types of things, and we bring it over to where when they get into the teaching practices, going from pre-service to in-service teachers, and we start to realize and identify that there are gaps that are needed, or they're not needed, I'm sorry, that the gaps that exist in the program, guess what? We change it. We figure out what's going on, and we can build on what they already bring to the classrooms, what they already bring to the teaching fields. Okay, so shifting now, because I told you the last topic was going about dealing with what? Teacher identity. What am I going to do with teacher identity? And what is teacher identity? Okay, so what's your teacher identity? Question for you. In that particular instance, a question for you, but we're going to figure out what that teacher identity is. Okay, and when we talk about teacher identity, there are several things that we can consider. Okay, what sets you apart? Okay, what makes you recognizable? And how do you brand yourself? By skills, sub skills, okay, as well as personal characteristics. For example, I am a university professor focusing on research as well as bilingualism and teaching methods and methodologies and approaches, etc. I am a preschool teacher. I am an elementary social studies teacher. I am and we can move on. So, who are you? What is your teaching identity? When I came across the question about what is your teaching identity, there were several assumptions, okay, common assumptions that I came across. And these common assumptions, I don't know if they're good or bad, but lots of things I came across. And in addition to that, when I was asking the question about identity, I received lots of information related to what? Gender. Gender is one thing, identity is another. And there are many contexts where the two kind of go and coincide, where they work together, which is fine. But for the purposes of this particular study, I was getting an idea about who you were or are as an individual, and how does that relate to your teaching identity in the classroom. Okay, understanding about who we are, because if we don't know who we are, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to label us. You see, label us. And so the idea is to figure out who we are. And so it was interesting that the data that I received thus far, it kind of pointed in the area of what? Gender bias. And that's not the idea. Gender is great. There are lots of studies related to gender, but I'm looking at gender, not gender, but I'm looking at identity as the individual and the teacher. So what did I come across? Came across a couple assumptions, all right? All teachers develop a view of what a good teacher does or what a good teacher is, okay? We can read in Facebook, we can look in social media, we can look at, you know, the thousands of blogs that exist that talk about a good teacher, a good online teacher, a good math teacher, a good science teacher, a good preschool teacher. So we have an idea of the stereotype that exists about what a good teacher can do. We also look at the roles that they play and the practices that they are actually doing. So, common assumptions. We can also talk about the good teacher identity is a desirable one, okay? Because still we have a long way to go. It's desirable. And what I'm trying to establish here is trying to establish an ideal, a desirable, I should say, desirable competences and skills that can actually help out with the teaching and learning process in that particular instance, okay? And related to what? Bi and multilingual classes. However, I also get some assumptions related to teacher identity because, as you know, we're looking at multilingual. So I came out with a bilingual teacher being able to speak two languages. Okay, bi, that's what it means. Okay. And I also got a bilingual teacher is a native speaker. Okay, well, I got a question mark there because my question mark here is quite interesting. Okay, is it that's what the teacher identity is? But once again, as you can see, this is what the mindset that lots of people have already established, and that's what they are thinking. Another one, a bilingual teacher can teach anything. Yeah. Well, I know we are heroes, and in this particular time and day, we are doing much more than we were, I should say, initially set out to do. Okay, we are heroes. Okay, we can do a lot of things, but are we superheroes in the sense that we can do anything? Yeah. So a common assumption in terms of teacher identity. All right. And these two right here, they pose a question because why? These are things that once again we talk about, we discuss, and they're often, I should say, or should I say, they are often looked at as the not the ideal, but the average practitioner in the classroom. Bilingual, a native speaker, and they can pretty much do almost anything in the class. Not the idea, but once again, some common assumptions that take place. So, shifting a bit more and just talking about what is that identity role, okay? It's developed what? Through social interaction, okay? With role partners and resources, okay? And we have what we call role relevant norms and expectations. I just showed you a few minutes ago. We talked about what? Some common assumptions. The good teacher, good teaching practices, okay? The ideal teacher, the best way to do certain things. So once again, we have role models, okay? But then we also have what we call some influences, all right, influences on the practitioner role identity formation. Okay, so that's that practicing teacher's role. Okay, past histories as learners, very important. Reflecting on where I came from, how I learned, and how that has actually become a part of my own teaching model. Teacher education programs, of course, they are very successful teacher education programs, and there are but not so successful teacher education programs. We have to be honest, they exist. Okay, and classroom-based experiences. So as you can see, these are three key areas that help me, Jermaine McDougall, to identify who I am as a language professional. What identity do I have? Okay, and once again, we talk about even within a particular role, identity is differentiated. Of course, we are all different, and I am not saying that we all have to be the same way. We are all labeled and relabeled time and time again. The goal here is that we understand and appreciate who we are. Okay? And once again, the curricular role identity. Dimensions of the curricular role as associated to what we're doing in that particular instance. Okay, in that particular instance. So as you can see here, lots of things going on here. Lots of things that we need to understand. But at the same token, identity is really focused on, well, once again, what? I should say, the environment, the context in which we are in, social interactions, and a lot of it comes from here. A lot of it comes from here. Okay, past histories as learners. I just did an exercise here a couple days ago in one of my sessions with my graduate students, and we were talking about a needs analysis for the CLIL context, needs analysis for the classroom. And one of the exercises that we did was what was quite interesting. I walked them down memory lane, where we had an opportunity to talk about who am I, who was I as a learner, acquiring English or acquiring Spanish, depending on their first language. And it was interesting to see. And then I had them to compare and contrast how they actually learned, the role models that they had, with what they are doing now as practicing teachers. And they, once again, trying to establish that identity, they start to realize that they had positive influences on their teaching practices, and they have several negative influences nowadays on their teaching practices. Okay? So, with that in mind, we talk about teacher knowledge according to how it's learned. Trying to winding down in terms of identity, we talk about knowing about, knowing how, and knowing to. Okay, this is a two right here in the corner. You probably can't see it. Apologize. Knowing to. Okay, so knowing to. So knowing about. I need to know about the subject as we talked about. I need to know how it's learned. I need to know about my school and institution and university in which I'm working. I definitely need to know about my students. And I need to know about strategies for continuing to develop as a teacher. This is me in terms of what? Creating, establishing that identity that I so need. Okay? All right? And then I'm going to move on to my next one, because my next one talks about what? Knowing how. And when I talk about knowing how, I need to know how to support learners through planning and teaching. I need to know how to notice what's happening in my classrooms. That's where all those research skills that's being observant comes into play. I also need to know how to provide classroom conditions that support my learning. If I know about my classroom, if I know what they need, and I can put it together, I know how to make some informed decisions. I need to know how to what? Assess learning. I need to be able to what? Relate to learners, colleagues, as well as parents. How am I doing that? Do I know how to do that as a teacher? All again, once again, a part of my identity. All right, and I need to be able to access, as well as use new ideas. Don't be afraid to try new things. But once again, as teachers, are we ready for those types of things? Can we do those things? Is that part of my identity? Is that part of the things that I'm going on? And last but not least, talking about two. I need to know what? To be able to use what? The knowing about and knowing how, the right place and the right time, making that match the perfect matrix coming together, knowing when and how to do certain things. And I need to know to be skilled at noticing aspects of the classroom environments. I also need to be able to what? Interpret what's noticed, use it, so I can what? Inform decisions on what to do next. What to do next. See? In teaching, this is a process. It's cyclical. It's going constant over and over and over and over again. So we really need to know how to do lots of things in order to once again help me be connected, to be identified with my identity in that particular instance. So last but not least, we talk about what? These are the competencies that we would need to develop. Teacher education curriculum, considering these types of things, okay? Design to be able to learn through, noticing, observing, once again laying the foundation, and be able to once again tell, read, and see what's going on inside our classrooms, okay? Got you so far. So as you can see, before I move on to my next item and my last part of our session for today, because we're coming to an end, I promised you we would look at a couple of some competencies. Promise you look at some of the competencies that I have already identified, and I put them in a couple of charts so you can see them really briefly, all in the same spot, so we have a better understanding about what I just talked about previously, how each and every one of those elements, they make up, I should say, what we would like to see in terms of competences for the ideal practitioner inside a content and language integrated learning classroom. Okay, so these are some of the ideas, competences that I have already looked at, established, and I have tried to regroup based on lots of the information that I found. One group talks about teacher competences in general, okay? So as you can see here, it pretty much leaves out lots of things. Cognition, communication, learning to learn, competences, social, initiative, creativity, personal. Now, you're going to find that lots of these competences are repeated. You're going to find that lots of these competences are repeated or duplicated. Why? Because the idea is we're looking at what some of the models exist, group A's. The group A's, when I say the group A, what is a group A? A group A consists of several other frameworks that I have looked at, and what I did was group them together, and where they were only focusing on teacher competences. Okay, so I tried to group them all in one here. Group B corresponds to my proposal, Jermaine S. McDougall. So this is my proposal per se, Group B, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. And basically, I was looking to do what? Put cognition, communication related to second language acquisition as well as first language acquisition, okay? Methodology and assessment I've grouped together. CLIL, bilingual education policies, but I also looked at intercultural competences as well as personal competences. So this is what Jermaine is thinking in that particular instance, okay? Trying to group everything together, only focusing on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 large areas. Actually, what I initially had, there are 11, and I had 11, there are 11 or 12 areas, and I broke them all down so we can only focus on 5 to 6 key areas, okay? Here's another one just looking more towards the CLIL approach, okay? So CLIL program competences, CLIL and bilingual education, target language competence for teaching, course development, supporting language, learning, etc. So this is another group in that particular instance. Another groups that we came up with, D, E, F, okay? Talks about what? Setting CLIL in motion. So I've got what we call integration, implementation. This is more about implementation here, okay? Looking at CLIL from an implementation set and what teachers need in order to be successful for the implementation process. So only on implementation, all right? Here it's talking about making a transition, okay, between what you're doing now as a language professional, as a content professional, and see how much of that is connected or related to CLIL. Nowadays, a more CLIL-oriented concept. So as you can see here, this is all about the 4 language skills, but at the same token, looking at the average teacher. This is, trying to fit the gap in that particular instance. Bilingual educators. So these are the ones that proclaim to already be working in a bilingual environment. And as you can see here, they're talking about what's the first thing on the list? Language proficiency. Can you speak the language? Are you bilingual? Okay, are you a native speaker? What are you doing? And we talked about attitudes, content knowledge, because mainly here I'm looking at the science teachers, the math teachers, the chemistry teachers, the biology teachers. Okay, linguistic knowledge. What do you know about the language in order to be able to teach it accordingly? Cultural knowledge and teaching skills at the end of the day. Okay, but here the focus is mainly on language proficiency. And last but not least, another group that we came up with corresponding to target professional competences, targeting professional competences. So personal, CLIL fundamentals, content and language awareness, methodology and assessment once again. And as you can see here, building learner capacity, cooperating, deploying strategies, lots of activities here. I kind of grouped them all in one chunk of information. Research and evaluation, learning resources, environment, classroom management, and last but not least, CLIL management. So as you can see here, I've been able to group lots of these areas together and still working to figure out what would be the ideal, the ideal. But in order to conclude, in order to close up our session for today, what can I tell you? What can I say? Some closing remarks and some ideas, some food for thought, if you want to call it like that. Teachers, in terms of multilingual, identity needs to be addressed more often because I am finding that what I have found thus far is that we don't have a clear understanding about what identity is. So it needs to be addressed more often. Competences also need to be developed in what? The initial teacher training phases. Okay? Because still we're having difficulties there because they are going to the field. They're going to, I should say, they're going to classrooms and they're still missing so much more. So the idea is to try to make a connection about how we are working with universities in terms of undergraduate programs and how schools, universities that are in actually the teaching mode, how are we connecting the dots? How are we trying to help out so that they can produce the elements that produce the type of teachers that we need, okay, in the field. Competences, skills, matrix are needed definitely to be defined and redefined here within my Latin American context. My invitation is to you as well in Asia and wherever you may be to also look and see what do you have nowadays in your closet as to competences, skills, or matrix in terms of that ideal practitioner inside the class dealing with both bi or multilingual environments. Okay? What else can I say? Linguistic imperialism is still very visible, very visible. Sad but true. We're in the year 2020, but once again, it is still there. So we need to figure out studies like this one can help us to once again get the word out so people are well aware of what's going on. Okay, many believe that still the native speaker are superior to the non-native speakers. Sad, but once again, the data is still reeling out to tell the same thing. What else can I tell you? The only acceptable variety of English is what? One used by native speakers. That is false, but once again, still it's out there. What about the Colombian Englishes? What about the Peruvian English? What about the Mexican English? Okay, or the Brazilian English? What about the Korean English, the Japanese English? Okay, what about the Saudi American English? What about the French English? The list goes on. We need to start to be able to understand the different varieties of Englishes that exist nowadays. Okay, and every native speaker has a better mastery of the English language than non-native speakers. Once again, false in that particular instance, false. So we need to consider those types of things as well. Okay, and once again, the attitudes towards emulating native speaker models still valid. I want to be like, this one. I want to be like the American speaker. I want to be like the British speaker. I want to be like this. I want to speak like this guy or this gal. Not the idea. Okay, I need to speak like myself, performing, understanding, and once again, communicating effectively in that particular language. So to conclude, what are we going to do looking ahead? What do we have looking ahead? It's going to take a generation or more for the mindsets to change. That's not going to happen overnight. I just said we've been working on this now for more than 30 years, at least labeling what we call native English speakers, expatriate speakers. We've been working on this for a very long time now, so we're trying to figure out what's the best route to take. Okay, more research is needed, I should say, in Latin America regarding that ideal teacher. Okay, that ideal teacher in that particular instance. But we also consider, for example, we also need to increase what? The studies to include more stakeholders, parents, administrators, making them much more aware. So I'm in the process of trying to figure out how can I get them on board as well to participate so we can better define and understand what's going on. What else can I say? Widen the study. Well, I'm looking to widen the study throughout Latin America. I started with Colombia, and the idea is to branch out into Mexico, Peru, not Peru, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, as well as Brazil in that particular instance. Promote what we call intercultural awareness of Englishes at all levels of education, at all levels of education. Because once again, those Englishes that exist, that you use, that I use, that we're accustomed to using, they're still not incorporated into our classrooms just yet. Okay, and the mindset cannot be changed overnight. But if we start now to appreciate, I understand our role, definitely we can make a difference. A difference can be made. Okay, so once again, my name is Jermaine Dougal. Here are a few selected references that I use to help put this presentation together. Okay, have the information out there. Hopefully, it could be useful to you, how what's going on, where you are in your context, and how you can start to also make a difference. I would love to stay in touch with you. I would love to stay in touch with you. And once again, I would once again thank you for allowing me to be here. I spent maybe an extra 10 or 15 minutes more than I had initially thought I would, but I think it's interesting. The information is valid, the information is key. And from Universidad de la Sabana, I would like to once again thank you for allowing us to be here, but also, a nice warm shout out from South America. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting with each and every one of you, and have a great day and have an awesome conference. Thank you so much. Bye bye.